Thank you for joining us on this brief context setting talk for suicide prevention in healthcare professionals who are undergoing a regulatory process. I've been quite privileged to be part of an expert advisory group at AHPRA, and I would like to thank Martin Fletcher and the team at AHPRA for this opportunity. As a director in my service, my job is to look after the people who are actually looking after the people we serve. And both as a leader and as a psychiatrist, there can be no greater calling than suicide prevention in the healthcare workforce. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Here in Brisbane, I stand on the land of the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I live and work on their lands, and I would like to pay my respect to them. Most of us working in mental health carry within us either personal stories or professional of loss through suicide. It was med school, 1994. A classmate jumped from the fourth floor, landing on the courtyard of our hostel. I was on the first floor balcony and actually saw him smash into the concrete. I was second on the scene, and I'll never know for sure, but his suicide, whether that is what led to me choosing a career in psychiatry, but it was something that was always at the back of my mind through my med school training. In 2001, I lost a loved family member, suicide. I'd spent the afternoon with him talking about life, philosophy, politics, all sorts. And he hung himself from the kitchen ceiling fan that night, in the early hours of the morning. I was already studying psychiatry and I did not have a clue. So, my passion for the work I do in suicide prevention definitely stems from that early experience as a young doctor. It's not so much that I want to share what was formative for me, but I do want to share an important life lesson that if you're not looking, you will not see it, even if it is in plain sight. With the benefit of hindsight, I know that day he had shared with me a number of kind of what we would call final acts. Um, for example, um, taking his son to the bank manager. His son had schizophrenia and he had a tremor, and he just wanted to make sure that there were no issues with his signatures on checks. He told me about the gifts he had purchased for the grandchildren for the autumn festival, which was still quite a few months away. I was about to leave for the UK, and he gave me his blessings and he said he may not be there when I return. And I told him to shut up and not say such things. Um, and he had been incredibly supportive of my career choice. And jokingly, he told me that he would rather die than let one of my kind, a psychiatrist, look after him. The context was he had this burning sensation in his feet and he could not sleep at night. And he had gone to his physician who had joked and said, "You don't need a physician, you need a psychiatrist," hinting at some form of somatization. He never had mental health issues, but perhaps he did not want to suffer like his son who had schizophrenia. And who knows, we can speculate. He was a stellar elder of the local community who retired from an extremely responsible job in the government, and everyone came for advice. It was unbelievable. But with the benefit of hindsight, was it really unbelievable? Anyway, the point of this personal narrative is that the eyes cannot see what the mind does not know, and the ears cannot hear unless you know what to listen for, and you're actively listening for it. I hope today's session will convince you of both. Create the desire to know what to listen for, and then in every interaction, actively listening for it. Also, suicide is an emotive topic. If it is the same for you as it is for me, please look after your well being. Speaking from personal experience, there is nothing worse than the harsh self talk with the benefit of hindsight that one can engage in. You might have worked out by now this talk is meant for people who are working in healthcare regulation, AHPRA, and the national boards in Australia, but it's applicable all over the world. Okay, let's dive into the context setting. The suicidal mind is often trapped in an overwhelming sense of despair. Stemming from entrapment, suicide becomes a salient solution to life circumstances. So, suicide is often conceptualized as an attempt to escape the entrapment of life. The pain is overwhelming, and suicide provides the promise of pain relief. The positions taken up by the person in suicidal distress and the professional can at times be quite divergent. The person believes suicide is the solution, whereas the professional believes it to be the problem. One of the things we hammer on in our training is if a power struggle ensues, not only is it difficult to connect with empathy, there is only one person who can win a battle of will. And that is the person in such intense psychological pain that they are contemplating suicide as a means of pain relief. Now, this is compounded many folds when the positions are perceived to be adversarial from the start. In your case, the regulatory action may be the source of the pain, and you, as the regulator, may be perceived as the agent of pain delivery. In such a situation, the challenge of empathic connection may feel like a mountain to climb. The snippets I'm sharing with you are just snippets. The PROTECT framework for suicide prevention by proactive detention is an extensive program. It is 2 decades of work, and the full experiential training takes 5 days to deliver. So retain whatever you can from the next 20 odd minutes. PROTECT has 3 large modules: CORE, ASSESS, and ASPIRE, that bring together a range of techniques, strategies, frameworks, and above all, a way of being that cultivates hope and bolsters the strengths with which a person in suicidal distress may have lost touch. It is an advanced course even for mental health professionals, so I will attempt to simplify the concepts I share, but please ask clarifying questions. There is, however, one golden thread that runs through the entire training that is relevant to everyone. Empathic human connection fosters relational safety. I repeat, empathic human connections foster relational safety. So, relational safety can be thought of as a deeply empathic therapeutic alliance that the professional establishes with the person in distress and their natural circle of support. There are 2 beautiful Zulu words that capture the essence of relational safety. The first is Sawubona. It's a greeting. A hello, meaning we see you. Me and my ancestors see you. Not just you, but you and your ancestors, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, and in the process of seeing, we bring you into being. To create relational safety for a person in suicidal distress, perhaps that is the way in which we need to see and listen to the person. The relationship itself becomes the springboard for recovery. This is captured in the second word, Ubuntu. I am because we are. Recovery is a journey of hope that is done together, in partnership. This is the golden thread that runs through PROTECT. How to use the healing power of human relationship. How do we make a person in suicidal distress truly experience Ubuntu? Through this concept of relational safety, PROTECT strives to create a new mindset, one in which the professional transitions from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. Often what is important to the person lies at the heart of the psychological pain they are struggling with. People do not get suicidal over things that do not matter to them. But so many of us mental health professionals begin our quest with what's the matter with you in our mind. A deficits approach attempting to diagnose a problem or illness in order to solve it or fix it. Now, if we established what matters to the person, knowledge of what's the matter with them will be an automatic consequence. As a regulator, you too, in your investigation, have to establish what's the matter with them that resulted in a notification. In that process, how easy is it or not to lose sight of what matters to them? It's a question to pause and reflect on. Being a healthcare professional is so central to their identity. Does regulatory action does not matter with how much kindness you do it. is it going to strike at the beating heart of this professional? Does it take away the reason to wake up in the morning and start one's day? So, from what's the matter with you to what matters to you may seem like a small shift, but it is significant in the way we approach the interaction. A lot will change if we can grapple with this shift. Let's get a bit deeper into a mind in suicidal distress. So, this is Schneidman's cubic model of suicide. I love it because it's simple and it takes us from a one dimensional linear model of suicide risk assessment thinking into a three dimensional one. So, as you can see, the cube has three axes: psychic, so a profound pain, a profound and seemingly unbearable suffering that exists in the mind's eye of the person in suicidal distress. Stress, overwhelming life pressures, largely external, could be sometimes internal, like command auditory hallucinations. Stresses or demands that impinge upon, move, touch, or psychologically affect an individual. And perturbation, this third axis. The psychological energy or oomph that is needed to overcome our natural threshold to avoid pain and death, that inner disquiet to do something to remedy the unbearable situation. The cubic model of suicide conceptualizes suicidal behavior as occurring from a synergy of the three psychological forces I've just named. It helps us think about situation specificity. How does an at-risk person find him or herself in situations that sparks a suicidal act? Now, each of Schneidman's constructs of pain, press, and perturbation exists on one of three axes in the model and can be rated from a low of 1 to a high of 5. Within this model, Schneidman has asserted that every suicidal act occurs when maximum levels of psychological pain, stress, and agitation are realized. So the lethal 5-5-5 corner cubelet of the model is particularly noteworthy as a very dangerous intersection and interaction of the three psychological forces. Plainly, the 5-5-5 conceptual corner of this model provides an excellent operational definition of clear and imminent danger to self. Now, that was 1993. A three-dimensional model will not pass the courier mail test today. So in the Protect Advanced course, we use a 7-dimensional model. I'm not going to go through the despair framework, but I want you to hold in the back of your mind the multifactorial complexity of suicidality, and that it is not a straightforward linear cause and effect connection. So going back to Schneidman's cube, shifting any of the dimensions will be protective. Beyond assessment, the model can also be used to formulate and target clinical interventions. Any clinical intervention that targets any of the three conceptual axes has the potential to meaningfully move a high-risk suicidal patient into a less dangerous psychological space. That means that if one can clinically help reduce, say, psychological pain or decrease the stresses in the patient's life or somehow find a way to ameliorate the upset, the potential for suicidal action can be significantly reduced. So, for example, allowing a student reprieve for 3 months to submit the thesis moves the person from a 5-5-5 to a 5-5-4, or giving lorazepam to take the edge off and decrease agitation, that moves them from 5-5-5 to a 4-5-5, or showing hope of a new treatment for a terminally ill spouse moves them from 5-5-5 to a 5-4-5. So, as you can see, there are 125 cubelets from the 1-1-1 corner here all the way to the 5-5-5 corner. And in between, there are 123 other cubelets other than these two diametrically opposite ones. So let's have a think about what are those 123 cubelets. So this is where we get into progression of suicidality. So from that 1-1-1 end to the 5-5-5 end. So as we have been discussing, the storm brought together by the different static and dynamic forces can be the cause of unbearable psychological pain, in which the person feels hopelessly trapped. Under these circumstances, one can see how hopelessness can drive suicidality. Suicide becomes the salient solution to the entrapment of life and overwhelming life circumstances. As psychological demands overpower the innate resilience and strength that exist within the individual, an unhelpful discourse emerges, weighing up the reasons for living and dying. In some, this may be just a passive desire to die. In others, suicidal ideation may be a more active process. On the time dimension, the increasing seriousness could be judged by both duration and frequency of suicidal ideation. Brief, fleeting periods could get longer till it is almost continuous. In a similar fashion, rare or occasional thoughts could get intermittent and then persistent. The intensity of these thoughts can fluctuate and attitudes towards them can vary as well. Some people will either reject them or be indifferent, while others are accepting or even find the thoughts comforting, helping them to believe that there is a way to escape the psychological pain. In many, ideation transforms into a skeletal plan, and some progress to plan their actions thoroughly. So plans may vary from vague, inexact, or non-specific to being detailed and concrete. If there is clarity about when, where, and how with access to means, the risk is obvious. Needless to mention that lethality of chosen means has a bearing on the degree of concern. Preparatory acts might involve steps related to organizing the attempt, like researching on the internet, to finding a time and place to avoid detection and rescue. Final acts, if present, significantly increase the imminence of an attempt. In some, this ramps up into rehearsals that stop just short of the attempt, and an extremely worrying development as the person has walked right up to the precipice of death and turned back. So exploring what made them stop often reveals protective factors and reasons for living. Okay, so in the assess module, we have a model called STEPS. It's an attempt to simplify the progression of suicidality. So please remember, it is not a linear process and people fluctuate amidst the steps. So all that I've said, let's put it into a seemingly linear model, but it's not linear, right? So the first step relates to dispositional factors or life events, which may predispose a person to suicidal distress. This predisposition may be biological, like genetic loading for depression, ongoing substance misuse issues, or life events that go back to childhood trauma, social deprivation, etc. One can think of this step as primarily comprising of static factors like gender, race, family history that have zero flux, or stable factors that have some flux but limited, like past psychiatric history that may predispose to future episodes of poor mental health, or social factors like housing, relationship, employment factors, which factors which have an ongoing nature. So in a predisposed individual, a major life event can precipitate suicidal ideation. So here we are talking about notification and the investigation. Keep that at the back of your mind. So here you have dynamic factors like recent loss, bereavement, relationship breakdown, loss of health, chronic pain, job loss, an episode of mental illness. And there may be multiple dynamic factors that interact with each other. Now, these interactions can result in intention formation, a stage where you're considering your options, researching, planning, etc., which can then proceed to action, i.e. an attempt. Of course, we know that from the national comorbidity sample that 1 in 4 do not engage in any planning and jump straight to action. So the steps of ideation, intention, and action, and how one progresses from the first to the next, are highly influenced by fluid factors. For a person in suicidal distress, these can change on an hour-by-hour basis and are determined by what is happening right here, right now, that impact a person's current thinking, feeling, and behavior, like a poor night's sleep, argument with a loved one, being caught up in traffic and missing a job interview on which they had been pinning their hopes, and so on. You get what I'm trying to say. So many professionals, particularly those working in crisis care or in the emergency department, have contact with patients in the next step, post-action, a period of reflection and emergence for many people, and a potential window for intervention. Most have remorse for making an attempt, but some do feel remorse because they're still alive and their emotional pain is carrying on. Of course, our goal is to take people towards a safe recovery. However, from post-action, people may end up in any of these steps outlined, and some may even have a repeat attempt. Now, needless to mention, whichever step the interaction happens in, our goal is to take the person towards a safe recovery. The purpose of sharing this model is to help you see that each step demands a different approach and is an opportunity to intervene. So, in all of medicine, the goal is to bridge the ideation and action divide, right? Obesity and steps to adopt a healthy lifestyle, like eating healthy, regular exercise, etc. So, same for, say, smoking. How do we get someone to pick up the phone to the quit line? They're thinking about it, they don't act on it. Hope you can see for someone in suicidal distress, it is the opposite. We want to keep the ideation action divide as wide as possible. And to widen the gap, we take a range of preventative measures. Foremost amidst them is clear articulation of what to do when and who is responsible for what. Now, I'm not going to go into safety planning, as I'm just setting the context of the discussion in relation to healthcare professionals. So let's elaborate a little bit on the ideation to action framework to help you see how this applies to doctors, nurses, OTs, etc. So the interpersonal psychological theory of suicidal behavior by Joyner proposes that an individual will not die by suicide unless they have both the desire to die by suicide and the ability to do so. So desire is postulated to come from two psychological states: a sense of low belongingness or social alienation, and perceived burdensomeness. Regarding ability, Joyner states that self-preservation is a powerful enough instinct that few can overcome it by force of will. The few who can have developed a fearlessness of pain, injury, and death through a process of repeatedly experiencing painful and otherwise provocative events. These experiences often include previous self-injury, but can also include other experiences such as repeated accidental injuries, numerous physical fights, and occupations like being a doctor, frontline soldiers, in which exposure to pain and injury either directly or vicariously is common. This gives rise to the capability to bridge the ideation-action divide. And now, if you kind of think of doctors and nurses who are desensitized to pain and death, have access to means, and an ongoing investigation that has cut them off from their natural circle of support at work, cannot go to work, a life event that threatens their very identity, and they feel like a burden because they cannot work at the moment. You can see how that all begins to add up. Blonsky in the three-step theory is more elaborate in terms of how one progresses from one step to the other. The development of ideation relates to pain and hopelessness from a range of sources. When the pain exceeds connectedness to people and purpose in the person's life, suicidality intensifies. And finally, bridging of the ideation and action comes from capacity, which may be genetic with a higher threshold for pain, or acquired through repeated exposure, or practical in terms of access or knowledge or expertise and means, all of which you can see relate to healthcare professionals. So hope you can begin to conceptualize how, as an investigation progresses, one may move in the cube, and how at certain points the risk may fluctuate quite significantly. The three axes in the cube capture nicely the idea of progression, both in terms of escalation of suicidal risk as well as de-escalation. An assessment for a person in suicidal distress is quite complex to get across in one image, particularly for those who are not trained in the field, but this one is quite a good overview. So when a mental health professional is assessing a person's suicidal distress, they are quickly seeking to establish which step a person is on, the steps in the step model. This kind of provides the assessment of focus, because the signs and symptoms we listen out for or the questions we ask are different on the different steps of the step model. Then they focus on the source, as it provides the origin of the pain. Span provides the extent of the risk fluctuation, i.e., how close have they ever come to bridging the ideation-action divide? And scenarios provide insight into the combination of factors that may result in actual action in the near future. So that's what a mental health assessment of someone in suicidal distress actually involves, these four dimensions. Now, you can overlay a regulatory process on this. Think of any of the professionals with whom you have worked, and they have been extremely distressed, and you can understand the importance of the step, the source, the span, and the scenarios in a person at risk. So the question is, what can be done? It begins with awareness. Awareness leads to mindful action that subtly modifies, changes the regulatory process, and the hundreds of employees having thousands of interactions. Now, we run a program for non-mental health professionals called Pearls, in which we help them understand the concept of psychological pain, and pain relief being a natural desire. We equip them with empathic words. We help them ask clearly and confidently. We get them to see the limits of their role, what they can do and cannot. We provide some practical strategies that help rather than harm or hinder, and create an individual safety plan. So the didactic version takes an hour, the experiential version takes 4 to 8 hours. This can be very easily adapted for all regulators, and I believe can significantly bolster all the mindful steps frontline regulatory employees in AHPRA and other places are already taking. The values we embed in the Pearls training attempt to capture the human connection, which displays through actions what matters to you also matter to me, effectively creating the common ground of what matters to us. The regulatory action with the mindset, this mindset of what matters to us, discovering that, gives rise to a very different set of actions that will actually foster healing after the tumultuous stages of notification and investigation is over. Thank you for listening. Would love to hear from you all, and you can connect up with us on any of our social media channels. Thank you again.